When the snakes come out of their enclosure on their own before you ask them to, and you're going to feed them and do a training session, it's best to come up with something as an alternative behavior that you can still ask them to do, even though they're already out. One of the alternative behaviors you could ask them to do is just to shift back into their enclosure. Since they shifted out on their own, you could just ask the snake to target back into the enclosure and then reinforce with their meal. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to ask him to do a different shifting behavior just to practice his shifting skills. So I'm going to set that up and then we're going to see how he does. Since I went to get the training target and the food reinforcer, he has disappeared either behind or on top of this enclosure. So I'm going to fish for him. I think he's actually on top of the enclosure because I can see a shadow from inside the enclosure, and I think that's him, but let's see. When you're not exactly sure where the snake is, oh, there he is. Sometimes it's a matter of presenting the target in some logical locations to where you think the snake might be, and then giving it enough time to see if there is a response. So I'm going to ask him, he's starting to shake his body and he's not supported by anything other than this enclosure. That's why I chose to reinforce there. It's not going to be a problem to get him the rest of the way down, and I've got a station set up below here. But he had stretched very far and I started to see his body was shaking, and I felt like that was a signal that he was unlikely to come any further. And before he got frustrated and struck at the target, or before he retreated and gave up and went back up on top, I went ahead and reinforced. For those of you who've been following my snake training for a while, you'll know that Vedra was the first snake that I ever trained. And I don't think I've shown her in a while. So I'm just going to do a simple targeting behavior and ask her to target to the door. I'm not going to ask her to come all the way out. I don't need to. Her enclosure was clean not too long ago, so I don't need her to shift out. But as you can see, she's been training the longest. She's the very first snake I trained, and she's just excellent at this behavior. She's fluid at it. She's confident at it. She knows exactly what to do. And she's very easy to move around in her enclosure, to target out of hiding, or to shift out of her enclosure. Sometimes lately she hasn't always wanted to shift back into her enclosure. Because she has started to find freedom reinforcing, and she has become a confident animal and likes to explore the room, even though when we initially met, she was extremely fearful and reactive to environmental stimuli, hid a lot, and was very fearful of the room at large and any activity in it. She now finds being out of her enclosure and exploring the room something that she enjoys, because she seeks to do it and does not always want to shift back into her enclosure when we are done training. While I was working with Vedra, Merlin finished eating his food reinforcement from repetition 1, and he was moving around on top of Boreth's enclosure, which is the one directly above his own. I signal him to come down. I have a station set up that he should be able to reach. I signal him to come down. That's it. In this case, the target is a cue to come down to the station and nothing more. My job now is to wait for him to figure out his preferred route to get from point A to point B. I do not need to lure him, prompt him, remind him, or guide him. He is an experienced learner who has been target training for 2.5 years, and he knows what to do. I am not asking him, in this case, to do a behavior chain or to position his body in a specific way. I just want him to come down, and he is free to accomplish that as he sees fit. The target remains at the station as his goal destination. So in this case, I don't move it until he is almost to it, and then I move it just enough to make sure most of his body is down. This is not a behavior to expect from a beginning learner. There is no way I would ask a new learner or one who has only been target training a short time to delay reinforcement for this long, and I would not expect them to know what to do. New and inexperienced learners need to be reinforced early and often for very small approximations or steps. In other words, for each small behavior that they do, they need to be rewarded. Merlin is experienced. Once he is cued, he knows what to do, and I just need to be patient and wait for him. He does a lot of approach and retreat. He tests different routes. He is problem solving his best course of action, and most importantly, he is thinking. He knows what his body can do and what he feels comfortable trying. He ultimately chooses to cross to the adjacent enclosures so that his body is supported by that surface as he makes his way down to the station, which I've placed adjacent to his enclosure. This whole process took him 5 minutes and 16 seconds to complete. That is from the time the target was presented and perceived by him until reinforcement was delivered by me. Note that I hold on to the food reward for a few seconds before letting go. That is to prevent him from snatching it and taking it with him back up high to the enclosure tops. My holding on to the food reinforcer briefly encourages him to hold on to it tighter himself and to pull the rest of his body down towards the station that I prefer him to end up on. When I came back to check on him later, he had finished his second food reinforcer and he was putting himself away.